Lord of Mysteries. My Identities Echoes Across Time. Chapter 61-70. Facing this question, Lynn suddenly fell silent. He seemed to be reminiscing, yet also not. After a while, he said, "It's nothing much, really." Seeing Lynn's reluctance to dwell on the topic, Klein felt disappointed. However, a few seconds later, he heard Lynn say, "He said to me, 'Long time no see.'" This wasn't a lie, as Lynn had indeed said, "Long time no see," to himself in his alter ego state. He had prepared enough for this scene long ago. So even if Klein were to use divination, he would only get the result that this was the truth. "Long time no see. Did you meet him before?" Klein was puzzled for a moment, then quickly asked. "No, I've never seen him before. I just thought he was acting strangely because of that." Lynn shrugged, saying, "Anyway, it doesn't matter. I probably won't see him again in the future." After saying this, Lynn seemed to have no intention of continuing the topic and started counting money. "No, with the attitude shown by the angelic countryman, you're 100% likely to meet him again," Klein thought to himself, looking at Lynn with a hint of contemplation in his eyes. He didn't think the angelic countryman's "long time no see" was aimless. Combined with Lynn's secret, Klein felt that the angelic countryman might actually know Lynn from a long time ago, but Lynn had forgotten. Thinking of this, Klein couldn't help but think of another person, Mr. Azek. Mr. Azek had forgotten the past, seemingly reincarnating time and time again in past years. Could Lynn be the same? Klein pondered, feeling that this possibility was not small. If that's the case, as time goes by, will Lynn remember past events like Mr. Azek? I wonder what kind of person he was in the past and what sequence he was. Klein muttered to himself, believing this speculation about 70 to 80%. However, out of caution, he would naturally check on the gray fog later to see if Lynn was lying. Although Lynn didn't fully understand Klein's speculation, he could guess it roughly. After all, this was the result of his deliberate guidance. As for Lynn's current identity arrangement as Lynn Soto's, the Angel of Secrets who lost his memory and power, it was simply because he had lost his memory and power for some reason. As for Lynn's angelic alias, it was naturally the split personality created by the Angel of Secrets. This could effectively explain Lynn's uniqueness, the special attention of the Angel's alias to him, and in the future, it would be natural to merge the two aliases without having to commit social suicide or be beaten up by the enraged fool. Moreover, strictly speaking, this is not a lie, because I did indeed lose my power and memory as the Angel of Secrets. I should talk to Little Red to see what kind of impact I have had on the past. Lynn thought to himself, taking out 2 gold bills from the pile of money in his hand and looking at Klein. "Come on, let's go for a late-night snack. I made a big profit today, so let's celebrate." It was well known that Lynn was a very proactive person. So, after deciding to meet Medici from this era, that night, after bidding farewell to Klein, Lynn came to the area above the underground building where Medici was located. By the way, in order to prevent Medici from being reported to the Evernight Church by Klein, who had not yet left the church, and then being purified, Lynn had seen the current owner of the house in advance. After some persuasion, he successfully dissuaded the other party from inviting other detectives to inspect the house, and the other party temporarily abandoned the house. And at this moment, standing at the entrance of the underground ruins, Lynn, without any hesitation, first used 008 to enhance his humanity a bit, and then entered the underground ruins. Consistent with the description in the original work, Lynn first saw one snake after another coiled together after entering the ruins. This was nothing more than a trivial matter for Lynn in his angelic state. Easily dealing with the group of snakes, Lynn walked through the corridor, observing the clearly Fourth-era style architecture, while remaining vigilant against any possible accidents. In this way, he passed through the corridor, passing by several rooms where the statues of 6 divine humanoids were placed. Apart from taking a special look at the one he had never seen before, the God of Knowledge and Wisdom, Lynn naturally bypassed the others. Ads by PubFuture. After all, most of them were gods he could see every day, and looking at them again would be boring. Finally, Lynn arrived at the room at the far end of the hall. He looked at the seemingly dangerous door for ordinary people but not worth mentioning for him in his current state, took a deep breath, and prepared himself mentally for the upcoming meeting. After making sufficient mental preparations, Lynn reached out, and his ability as a sage allowed him to easily open the door in front of him. Behind the door, a figure sitting on a black high-backed chair looked up at Lynn at this moment. How to describe the figure? Clearly, the features were still very familiar, but much more mature. He was wearing blood-stained black armor, similar to the style Lynn had seen, but it was a more adult version and was tattered. His long hair, as red as blood and fire, remained as before. Looking into Medici's eyes, which used to be vibrant and full of life, Lynn now felt a hint of indescribable weariness and vicissitudes, madness and malice. On his still handsome face, there were faint traces of decay on the left and right sides, each with a wound. Sauron Einhorn Medici. Lynn suddenly felt sad and angry. Even though he had known that he would see such a Medici long ago, when he truly saw the other party's miserable appearance, Lynn still felt very uncomfortable. It was like his dog being well taken care of every day, but unexpectedly, one day, without his knowledge, the dog was bullied by other dogs outside and almost bitten to death. Not to mention that Medici was not a dog, but his brother, his dear brother. Then Lynn heard Medici, sitting in the black high-backed chair, speak, his voice much deeper than the familiar one. I wonder if I should say long time no see, or is it our first encounter? Medici looked at Lynn with a scrutinizing gaze, paused, and then emphasized, brother. Lynn looked at Medici, silent for a moment, and then replied, long time no see, Medici. Hey, I think our first encounter is more appropriate. Medici folded his arms, clearly sitting down but creating a sense of superiority out of thin air, giving off a strong sense of oppression. But at this moment, the two wounds on Medici's face suddenly spoke up. Is this your brother? Haha, he looks very ordinary. Medici, you're actually a younger brother. End of this chapter. Welcome to Fanfic Audiobook, your go-to place for immersive audiobooks. If you enjoy the content, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel for more amazing stories. This is your brother. Haha, he looks quite ordinary. Medici, you're actually a little brother. Looks like we've been treating Medici unfairly. After all, he's a little brother. Ha ha ha, no wonder you never discuss topics related to siblings. It's because of this. Understood, understood. The atmosphere was suddenly shattered, accompanied by the banter of Soren and Einhorn. Suddenly, the atmosphere became cheerful, full of the feeling of a comedy scene. Shut up. Medici couldn't maintain the dignity he had just established. His brows furrowed as he snapped, followed by a sarcastic remark, I indeed can't compete with you guys in this regard. After all, I'm not a sister. Or should I address you both as old grannies? Sauron and Einhorn fell silent for a moment upon hearing this, then opened their mouths to speak. However, Medici preemptively anticipated their actions, reaching out to rub their cheeks before they could utter a word, evidently preventing them from speaking further. Seeing this scene, even though his mood was somewhat down, Lynn couldn't help but laugh. He felt that in this world, names might be called wrongly, but nicknames were never mistaken. The trio of comedians lived up to their reputation. Then, Lynn tilted his head slightly, crossed his arms, and smiled, do you need your big brother's help, little red? His expression was gentle, exactly like an older brother caring for his younger sibling. However, only Lynn knew how much of this caring expression was genuine. Although Lynn truly cared for Medici, he also enjoyed seeing Medici's antics and jokes. He was the kind of elder brother who would shield Medici from danger but would kick him if he fell into a pit. You can't really say he's an irresponsible brother, but calling him responsible would be dishonest. You shut up too. In the midst of his busy schedule, Medici glanced at Lynn, clearly seeing through Lynn's true intentions. With a disdainful glare, he continued to quarrel with Soren and Einhorn, turning it into a domestic battle. Lynn wasn't angry either, leisurely watching the scene. When Medici finally managed to suppress the other two members of the trio, preventing them from continuing their banter, Lynn calmly spoke, Medici, how do you view me? What do you think I should think of you? Medici didn't directly answer Lynn's question, just staring at him with emotions that were hard to discern in his blood-red eyes. Raising his chin slightly, Medici's tone carried a hint of mockery. Brother. Or perhaps, a stranger who suddenly barged into my past. That's truly saddening. Lynn pretended to look sorrowful, but he wasn't really too sad. Because Lynn could see that Medici's true emotions were not just mockery and sarcasm. While Medici didn't truly see him as a monster or a stranger, he might not see him as a brother yet, but he was shaken by their shared past. Therefore, Lynn didn't mind Medici's attitude. He just looked at Medici and said calmly but earnestly, "Of course, I hope you see me as a brother. Perhaps to you, I indeed seem like a stranger who suddenly intruded into your past." Here, Lynn paused for a moment, sighed, and then continued, "But for me, you are the first family I've had since I came to this world. Your past may be history for you, but for me, it's the present. Medici, perhaps you think I've intervened in your past without permission, but in reality, I'm just living my life as best as I can." Medici was momentarily stunned, his brows slightly furrowing as he asked, "What do you mean?" "It means that since I arrived in this world, I've existed in two different timelines. Your past is my present. Perhaps you think I intentionally meddled in your past, but in reality, it's fate. Fate made me your brother in the second era, and it made me wake up in this body in the fifth era, able to see you now." Ads by PubFuture. Lynn calmly dropped a bombshell. In that moment, he knew his previous speculations about the past were correct. Therefore, after a few seconds of contemplation, Lynn decided not to hide the fact that he existed in two different timelines. It was a secret, but one that couldn't be kept hidden, so Lynn decided to use it as leverage. Medici was clearly shocked by this revelation, perhaps also surprised by Lynn's easy confession. His expression changed several times before finally returning to calmness, asking, "What are you, exactly?" "That's a question I also want to know." Lynn shrugged. He truly wanted to know what he was, and he had contemplated this issue before, so he spoke openly about it now. "I know you suspect I'm from outside or some sort of outer god, and I have the same suspicion myself. But regardless, one thing is certain, I harbor no ill will toward this world. Otherwise, with my abilities, if I wanted to destroy something, you wouldn't necessarily be able to stop me, right?" Lynn smiled. His words naturally referred not to his Sequence 2 abilities but to the power he had shown in front of Medici and the ancient sun god, the power he had displayed after borrowing the power of an unknown entity. In that state, Lynn was honestly not an opponent an ordinary Sequence 0 could handle. Medici remained noncommittal, maintaining an air of superiority as he looked at Lynn, evidently weighing the credibility of Lynn's words. Lynn then looked at Medici, continuing to smile as he said, "Little Red, haven't you realized what having a big brother like me means?" Medici was momentarily stunned. As a top-tier conspirator, he almost immediately realized what Lynn meant. "It means that as long as I'm willing, I can change your past, prevent you from being killed by Alista, change your current situation, and make you become the Red Angel again, or even more." Lynn chuckled as Medici grasped his meaning. Then, Medici saw the young man in front of him extend a hand, as if extending an invitation. "So, do you want your brother to save you, Medici?" End of chapter. Ads by PubFuture. "So, do you want your brother to save you, Medici?" Medici seemed to hear the person in front of him say so. Just like in that memory, many years ago, on the battlefield of the demonic wolf, Lynn Sotos defeated the lucky god who ambushed him and said to him, "Little Red, do you want your brother to protect you?" "Hey," Medici suddenly chuckled, looking at Lynn with eyes matching his hair color, his tone as mocking as ever, "If what you said is true, my dear brother, have you been 3 months full yet?" While speaking, Medici stood up and grabbed Lynn's hand that reached out to him fiercely. "Even if it's not 3 months yet, your brother is still your brother." Lynn smiled back, gripping back equally hard, seemingly unsurprised by Medici's choice. For a mature king of angels like Medici, a sudden appearance of the past might shake him, but it clearly couldn't be a decisive factor. But what if this, plus irresistible benefits, were added on top? "I can save you, as long as you admit that past. I can save you." That was Lynn's bargaining chip, and with the doubt of being an outer god, it was only logical to keep a close eye on him, just as the ancient sun god did. And with such a good start, Lynn was confident he could get along with the adult version of Little Red just as well. After all, growing up really did make him less cute than when he was a child. Lynn thought somewhat regretfully. Only Medici knew what he was thinking at the moment. The two of them exerted force against each other like this for almost half a minute before letting go simultaneously. Rubbing his slightly sore wrist, Lynn suddenly spoke, "Little Red, have you realized something else?" Medici raised an eyebrow at him. Lynn smiled mischievously. "Since I exist in both the past and the present, it means that if I want to, I can beat up your younger self anytime." Although his smile contained no hint of provocation or mockery, his words were infuriating. Medici. His fist hardened. If before Lynn said this, Medici was still pondering whether Lynn's personality displayed in his past was a facade, at this moment, Medici confirmed. This guy never hid his true nature. He was just a jerk through and through, beyond redemption. Medici even dared to say that even Amon and his brother put together might not be able to bear with Lynn Sotos. "Sotos, have you fallen to the point of enjoying bullying children?" Restraining the urge to hit him, Medici spoke sarcastically. "Thanks, I'm just a child who hasn't reached 3 months old yet," Lynn said without batting an eye. "Let's show Saussure, the type of rubbish favored by him," Medici sneered, obviously recalling an unpleasant past. "Little Red, do you really think Saussure doesn't know that I'm a naughty child?" Lynn immediately showed an expression as if looking at something rare. Looking at Medici, "He certainly knows, but with your mouth, isn't it normal for him to favor me?" The expression seemed to say, "Little Red, don't you have any sense at all?" "Hey," Medici chuckled coldly, too lazy to argue. He then looked at Lynn and said, "You came to see me, not just to chat about these trivial matters, right?" "It's not just that. I mainly want to understand your current situation and the impact of my changes on you in the past," Lynn said with a smile. "Don't you know?" Medici raised an eyebrow, looking at Lynn. "I have some guesses, but I'm not completely sure." Lynn didn't hide anything in this regard. "How did you gain memories of the past, and how did you recognize this memory? Can you tell me in detail? The more I know, the more I can rest assured when I save you in the future, right?" Listening to Lynn's casually drawn pie, Medici chuckled, apparently scrutinizing him. Lynn smiled and accepted his scrutiny. The two exchanged glances, neither backing down. In the end, Medici leaned back, casually resting his hands on the armrests of the chair, crossing his legs, and said, "Want to know?" "Beg me." "Brother," he called, his tone quite provocative. "I'll beat you up." Lynn looked at him with a smile. "Guess who's unlucky if there's a commotion, you or me?" "Hey," Medici sneered, unmoved. Seeing this, Lynn acted like an elder brother who couldn't do anything about his younger brother, shaking his head affectionately. He then looked at Medici and said seriously, "I'm asking you." Medici's mouth curved up slightly, then stiffened. He looked at Lynn and gritted his teeth. "If you're so capable, why don't you stop beating up my younger self?" "Huh, what are you talking about? Big brother doesn't understand." Lynn, who had just finished beating up Medici's younger self with a Smurf account, was all refreshed and innocent. Medici really wanted to punch someone, but he also knew very well that he couldn't beat his brother when he was a child, and he still couldn't beat the elder brother in front of him either. Well, it's just an experiment, and besides, don't we fight all the time?" Lynn said in a comforting tone, then continued, "If you're really that angry, wait until you become the Red Priest in the future, then come back and beat me up." "Hey," Medici chuckled coldly, obviously having this plan in mind. Lynn raised an eyebrow at this and decided to beat up Little Red a few more times later. After all, the other party did deserve a beating, and there was no guilt in fighting. Medici continued, "About 10 days ago, I began to gain memories related to you one after another. I doubted the truth of those memories, but in the end, I confirmed that the past was indeed changed by you. Everything you did in the past did indeed have an impact on me now, not just a simple fabrication of memories." "What kind of impact?" Lynn couldn't help but ask. He shouldn't have done anything that could change Medici's fate yet. Medici glanced at him, the corner of his mouth twitching, his expression provocative. "You want to know?" End of chapter. When do you want to know? Medici's expression when he said this was truly asking for a beating. But you definitely won't tell me. Lynn glanced at him, having gotten quite familiar with Medici during their time together, skillfully ignoring his provocations and smiling, so I'll just guess on my own. For example, this change, I think it should be related to your experience before following the ancient sun god, right? Considering all the good things Lynn had done for Medici, he felt this was the only thing that could somewhat fit. After all, in his original history, Medici would have wandered alone for a while before choosing to follow the ancient sun god for some unknown reason. Rather than being born and immediately taken in by him, becoming a cub under Saucerier's care. It seems your intelligence still matches your 3-month-old level. Medici chuckled, his tone as sarcastic as ever, but he didn't refute it. He did confirm the change in his memories because of this experience, realizing that the memories weren't false but had been genuinely altered. During that time of solitary wandering, Medici had suffered severe injuries, not physical but spiritual, leaving indelible traces on his soul despite being healed and restored later. These scars remained even after he became a spirit. But after gaining the memories related to Lynn, while the memory of being wounded remained, the scars disappeared, confirming that those memories weren't false but a true reflection of the altered past. Lynn Sotos indeed had the power to change destinies. But Medici naturally wouldn't go into detail with his hapless elder brother. He casually skipped over the topic and continued, "But before I saw you today, I couldn't see your face clearly in my memories or hear your name. All the specific information about you in my memory was vague, as if deliberately hidden by some force, until I saw you, and that secrecy vanished." As he said this, Medici also observed Lynn, evidently studying him. Secrecy. Lynn wasn't concerned about his observation, just showing a puzzled expression after a moment's thought. He really hadn't expected this outcome, considering both 008 and Old Man Pallas remembered him. Wait, did their memories also recover only after seeing him? Lynn thought of this possibility but then dismissed it, feeling relieved. If his core information remained secretive, it meant he wouldn't immediately attract trouble from formidable individuals like Amon, nor worry about an Amon brother silently sprouting out of thin air beside him, maybe. Lynn suddenly became uncertain, but then he pushed aside that possibility and continued to ponder. Overall, this secrecy seems more like a protection for me. But why would it be like this? Is it because of some inherent characteristic of mine? As Lynn pondered, he heard Medici's mocking tone. "It seems you really know nothing about this state, Sotos. Now, I'm not worried at all about you posing a threat to this world. Someone like you, who can't even control your own power, is just a weakling no matter how strong you are." Lynn, well, it seems someone has really grown wings after 3 days of no scolding. Lynn then looked at Medici and flashed a brilliant smile, "Then let our dear little Red experience firsthand whether I'm a weakling or not." In the end, Lynn thoroughly enjoyed beating up Medici without causing much commotion. Ads by PubFuture. It wasn't that War Angel's combat skills hadn't improved over the years, but the current situation where he was still in the form of a spirit without any Beander characteristics directly led to a suppression in rank when facing Lynn, who could effortlessly exert Sequence 2 strength. Just like how you couldn't expect a Sequence 4 to beat a Sequence 2. And after the daily beating of his dear little brother, Lynn remembered something and looked at Medici. "By the way, Little Red, do you have the cards of blasphemy from the Hunter's Path?" "The cards of blasphemy? You mean this thing?" As Medici said this, a tarot card depicting the portrait of Russell appeared in his hand, which was precisely the Red Priest card. Lynn's gaze immediately fell on the Red Priest card, nodding eagerly. Yes, that's it. "Can I borrow it for a while?" "Why do you want this card?" "It's something from the Hunter's Path, and you shouldn't have any need for it." Medici played with the card in his hand, looking at Lynn with a puzzled expression. "You're not part of the Hunter's Path, nor have you forcibly entered the path. If you're talking about formulas, don't you already have them?" Lynn did indeed have the formula from the Hunter's Path, mainly because after promising to give Lynn and Medici the full formula for the corresponding paths, the father figure Saucerrier copied the formula directly and gave it to Lynn to pass on to Medici. Actually, I mainly want to study that thing and see if I can copy it, replicate something similar." Lynn revealed a shy smile. "Replicate it? What do we need it for? Medici obviously didn't expect this answer. He glanced at Lynn with a tone that was still sarcastic, and don't forget, this thing's nature might be related to those outer gods outside the barrier. Studying it. Oh, right, I forgot, you're also essentially a little monster now. If the outer gods catch you, who corrupts whom is uncertain. Be confident, ordinary outer gods will definitely be corrupted by me in return. If I were really an outer god, I would be at least at the level of Bitch Tree. Lynn didn't feel ashamed at all and even showed extreme confidence. This left Medici dumbfounded for a moment, then he flicked his wrist, and the cards of blasphemy of the Red Priest flew towards Lynn. Lynn quickly caught it, hearing Medici's lazy voice, I'm lending it to you. Remember to return it after studying. This time Lynn was surprised. He had thought there would be several rounds of sarcastic banter and a bit of tug-of-war before Medici agreed. Lynn looked at Medici with clear disbelief, his expression clearly asking, why are you so easy to talk to this time? There isn't some conspiracy waiting for me, is there? Medici glanced at him, unkindly saying, if you don't want it, return it. End of this chapter. I want it, I want it. Don't worry, I'll definitely finish studying it early and give it back to you. Lynn hurriedly put away the cards, following the principle of being persuasive. Then he remembered something and asked, are you okay in your current state? Do you need me to find you a lucky death pathway? Lynn certainly wouldn't harm innocent death pathway beyonders, but there was still the Evernight Church, right? It would be easy to find a death pathways beyonder there who deserved their fate. And if Medici could regain mobility, no longer confined to this underground tomb, even if he hadn't fully recovered his King of Angels level combat power, it would be a boost for Lynn. That's right, it's that practical. After all, everyone is adults now. While discussing relationships, of course, one must also consider the benefits and losses in reality. It's just right to repay the favor of the Red Priest card while considering practical interests. No need for you to worry. You should worry about yourself. Medici said, looking at Lynn with blood-colored eyes, with a slightly mocking expression, your state isn't any better than mine. Are you at sequence 4 now in this state? It must be quite a burden for you to use sequence 2 power in this state, even if you can still use your inherited power. But if I'm not mistaken, you seem to dislike that power. Lynn was stunned for a moment. He hadn't expected Medici to see through this, so he reflected on whether he had underestimated these King of Angels. They may not see through his essence, but for other aspects, such as positions and pathways, they obviously understand better than him. After all, Lynn was just an outsider. Although he gained many secrets through the original novel, his understanding of positions and pathways was still not as good as someone like Medici, who had been an archangel for thousands of years. But Lynn didn't care too much. He didn't feel any guilty conscience about being seen through, but instead smiled and said, so, Little Red, look at how great you are. Obviously, your own condition isn't good, but you still remember to save me. Isn't that touching? Seeing through is seeing through, but it doesn't affect him using his advantages to beat people up. Medici immediately made a disgusted expression as if he had been nauseated. Do you even know what you're saying? I'm telling the truth. Lynn spread his hands, indicating that he was fearless as long as he had thick enough skin. Hey, Medici obviously didn't care much about this, almost rolling his eyes. So, you really have nothing that needs my help? Lynn skillfully ignored Medici's expression and asked seriously. This young master doesn't need you to worry. If you really want to help me, change that past sooner. Medici crossed his arms, looking at Lynn. Let's see, you, as a brother, can really save me. Don't worry, I will. Lynn smiled. So, with one thinking about definitely beating the other after his recovery, and the other thinking about having a tool to use after recovery, the two brothers' atmosphere became more harmonious under such circumstances. Although I'm here to save Little Red, the first Smurf account is still far from the cooking hotpot incident in Lowen Kingdom, and I don't know how to start the second Smurf account. I really don't know how to proceed. After bidding farewell to Medici and returning to 16 Minsk Street, Lynn, who had ended the cheat status and promptly treated himself with 008, played with the Red Priest card but felt a little worried. Although he promised Little Red to save him, this matter is still quite difficult for Lynn at the moment. The only two solutions are probably either wait patiently for the first Smurf account's time to advance to the fourth epoch. Considering the different flow rates between the first Smurf account and the main body, it may not necessarily take a long time. Or, he figures out how to open an alter ego in the fourth era. But I haven't fully mastered this power. The first time I opened an Smurf account was by accident. It's difficult. Should I try the power of positive thinking? After all, it's my power. Maybe it can change because of my will. Thinking of this, Lynn acted on it. He concentrated his mental attention, repeatedly chanting in his mind, I want to open an alter ego in the fourth epoch. I want to open an alter ego in the fourth epoch. I want to open an alter ego in the fourth epoch. Ads by PubFuture. After repeating this for about half an hour, Lynn sighed and lay on the chair like a pancake. It's useless. Damn it, why didn't the main body give me an instruction manual when splitting the inheritance, or did he actually give me one, but I forgot? Lynn muttered, lying there for more than 10 minutes before sitting up again. Forget it, I can only choose method 1 for now. Little Red, it's not that I don't want to save you immediately, it's just that I'm powerless. May the Lord bless you. Open sesame. Lynn pretended to pray for Medici still underground, then took out an iron box from the drawer. After opening the iron box, inside were the Beander materials needed for the Melee Scholar potion. Let's promote first. I don't know if this potion will digest instantly this time, Lynn said, taking out the cauldron used to mix the potion. After skillfully throwing all the materials into the cauldron, a bottle of colorful Melee Scholar potion with a sense of whiteness was created. In theory, normal Beyonders should adjust their state to the best condition before taking the potion. But Lynn was different. He directly relied on the divinity still remaining in his body and gulped down the Melee Scholar potion. Damn, it tastes terrible. Lynn's taste buds were tortured in this moment, almost spitting it out on the spot. After grimacing for a while, he finally recovered. And after recovering, Lynn found that he had successfully promoted to a Melee Scholar. His body seemed to have undergone transformation during the promotion, with various qualities improving, some instinctive combat abilities added, some combat-related knowledge in his mind, and gained skills such as rapid spellcasting, enhanced spirituality, easier insight into corrupted things, and so on. Of course, most of these were not very useful for Lynn. He already had spirituality and perception not inferior to King of Angels, even more acute than King of Angels. In addition, mostly due to the influence of the first alter ego, Lynn found that he had digested about 70 to 80% of the Melee Scholar potion he had taken, and even without using the cheat account, he could fully digest the remaining part in a couple of days, which was almost instant dissolving. And the next chapter will introduce a new alter ego. You can guess which era it is. End of chapter. It was as uneventful as expected. Lynn muttered a small complaint but didn't mind drinking in silence. After all, the initial promotion of his main account wasn't meant to enhance combat power, but to lay the groundwork for higher sequence promotions later on. With the passage of time on my Smurf account, theoretically, there will come a day when the two timelines will overlap. I wonder what will happen then. Lynn suddenly thought of something, scratching his chin thoughtfully. Will it trigger some hidden settings, like the Smurf account merging with the main body? That way, I wouldn't have to work hard, ha ha ha. Lynn felt this possibility was real. After all, people should have dreams. But such a future was too distant. So, after a brief daydream, Lynn decided to focus on the present. He stretched his body, getting used to the changes brought by the Melee Scholar potion. Once he was familiar with it, Lynn began eagerly researching the cards of blasphemy, Red Priest card. Following the descriptions in the original text, Lynn successfully activated the Red Priest card. As expected, he saw the limited edition Russell Emperor image from Sequence 9 to Sequence 0 in the Hunter pathway. In a sense, the Emperor really was a genius. Lynn muttered, casually sketching a few card images he liked for keepsakes before starting his formal research. Unfortunately, probably due to not having any external hacks, Lynn, who was still only at Sequence 8, didn't discover anything significant. This made Lynn a bit disappointed, but he decided to wait until he was fully recovered and then use the power of his Smurf account to study the Red Priest card. Even if he couldn't completely decipher its secrets, he wanted to record all the necessary data for future reference in making the chess of blasphemy. As for now, Lynn decided it was time to take a bath and go to sleep. After all, he had a surprise for Mr. Fool tomorrow and needed to be fully rested to play the game in his best state. The next morning, after a good night's sleep, Lynn woke up feeling refreshed, ready to stretch lazily and start a new day. But then he paused in surprise. Lynn realized he suddenly had an additional perspective, turning his dual views into three. He had a second new Smurf account. Could it be that yesterday's wish really worked? Does this mean I could soon have a tool at the level of a king of angel? Ahem, does this mean I could save Little Red soon? While pleasantly surprised, Lynn quickly switched his main consciousness to the newly opened Smurf account, eager to see what the situation was. But the next second, as Lynn successfully switched to the second Smurf account, he was stunned to find himself in outer space. Beneath his feet was a familiar sapphire blue planet, just like the ones he'd seen in documentaries, but with a transparent barrier covering its surface like an eggshell encasing it. Not far from the blue planet, a huge blood-red sphere slowly orbited. But that wasn't the main point. The main point was a giant, grotesque tree made of flesh and blood, its branches attacking a middle-aged man. The man looked to be in his mid-30s, with a serious and composed expression. Despite being at a disadvantage against the giant tree, he remained calm. He had handsome features, his hair a unique void black with some white strands, and his striking blue eyes seemed to hold endless mysteries. He wore noble attire from the fourth epoch, adorned with numerous gemstones, indicating either a love for gems or a need for them in spellcasting. Lynn blinked. He couldn't help but look at the blue planet beneath him, then at the man fighting the giant tree. His first reaction was, "Holy crap." His second reaction, "Damn, I hit the jackpot." Despite the initial shock, upon realizing the identities of the two figures before him, Lynn charged forward. "Hey, you bitch tree, let go of Mr. Door." Ads by PubFuture. While saying this, Lynn unhesitatingly attempted to draw power from his unknown true body. It wasn't recklessness or fear of assimilation. Lynn knew that if Mr. Door fell, the bitch tree wouldn't spare him either. At that point, his self-defense mechanism would activate, likely still drawing from his true body's power. Given this, it was better for Lynn to take the initiative. This way, he could at least leave a hint to break free, rather than relying on luck. Both Mr. Door and the bitch tree sensed Lynn's presence and turned to look. They saw a boy, around 16 or 17, smiling brightly but without much emotion. "Do you two want to play a game?" As he spoke, time in the area froze. Though he invited them to play, Lynn didn't care whether Mr. Door and the bitch tree agreed. "As long as I want to play, you all have to play with me." This was Lynn's current logic. Willful and powerful, capricious and wanton. For Mr. Door, also known as Bethel Abraham, today was the most tumultuous day of his life. Whether it was the unlucky encounter with the immensely powerful Mother Tree of Desire while exploring the stars or being saved by a suddenly appearing boy when he was about to be corrupted, Bethel couldn't remain calm. Especially the power the boy displayed, a power not inferior to the Mother Tree of Desire and even making it flee in panic, reminded Bethel Abraham of the legendary beings above Sequence 0, those of the above the sequence level. Author note. Didn't expect it, did you? It's not Earth. The Earth Smurf account will appear later with significant purpose. Friendly reminder. The synopsis is for reference only, all content is subject to the actual text. The Smurf accounts mentioned in the synopsis will definitely be written about, but the order is undecided. End of chapter. To Bethel Abraham's surprise, after the Mother Tree of Desire fled, and while he was contemplating how to speak to the boy gave him a cold look and then fainted without warning. The boy's aura no longer appeared dangerous and even seemed like an ordinary angel. This uncharacteristic moment of confusion made the usually serious and meticulous Bethel Abraham feel quite at a loss. Despite his confusion, Bethel Abraham sighed, hesitated for a moment, and then bent down to carry the boy on his back. While wary of other outer gods approaching, though it seemed unnecessary since the battle between the boy and the Mother Tree of Desire had scared off all the other outer gods watching the area, Bethel carried the boy, opened a door, and left the troubled place. Thus, on that day, the core members of the Abraham family in the Loan Kingdom were shocked to learn some news. Their patriarch suddenly brought back a strange boy. Although the boy's appearance was not very similar to the patriarch's attitude toward the boy was quite unusual. This news immediately caused a stir within the Abraham family. While the non-core members were still unaware, rumors began to circulate among the core members. Somehow, the story evolved into a rumor that the boy was actually Mr. Door's lost child, and the credibility of this rumor was surprisingly high. So, after confirming that he hadn't been corrupted, Bethel Abraham, upon leaving his room to check on his savior, encountered his second-in-command, who was responsible for handling various family matters and was also his butler and confidant. After discussing the family's internal affairs for a while, the butler suddenly coughed lightly and said, "Master Bethel, about the child you brought back, what do you plan to do with him?" "You don't need to worry about this matter," Bethel Abraham replied vaguely, as he couldn't tell the butler about his encounter or the boy's peculiar nature. "Yes, Master Bethel," the butler nodded understandingly and then added after a few seconds, "but how should we address that young master?" Hearing this question, Bethel Abraham fell silent for a few seconds because he didn't know the boy's name. The only thing he was sure of was that the boy was not an outer god. However, as an old king of angel familiar with human interactions and travels, Bethel Abraham sensed something else in the butler's words. He glanced at the butler and thought of the family's high-ranking members who loved to gossip and write little stories in their spare time. Suddenly, he felt a headache. Bethel was sure that the Abraham family's high-ranking members were likely already speculating about his relationship with the boy and had probably concocted over 100 different versions of their relationship. After all, some of the high-ranking members even dared to write post-marriage stories about the Night Empress and the Night Emperor in their free time. This had always been a headache for the serious and meticulous Bethel Abraham, but even when he issued strict prohibitions against such behavior, there were still people who would secretly spread stories. Mr. Door couldn't possibly severely punish these core members of the Abraham family for such trivial matters, so over time, he had to let it slide. "He is not," Bethel Abraham began, intending to clarify the situation to avoid any awkward misunderstandings later. Just then, a family member responsible for looking after the unconscious boy ran over. "He's awake. The young master is awake." Ads by PubFuture. When Lynn woke up, his mind was sluggish, and it felt like he was separated from the world by a layer of glass. He seemed isolated from the world, with his emotions and thoughts in a subtle state. Lynn stared blankly at his surroundings for a few minutes before his mind gradually returned to normal, and his senses recovered. He began to breathe heavily and patted his chest with lingering fear, feeling that he had taken a huge risk this time. Compared to the time when he turned the Dragon of Nightmares into a pen, the power he borrowed from his true body this time was much greater. The Bitch Tree was a first-rate existence among the outer gods, far beyond the Dragon of Nightmares, even though the Bitch Tree wasn't at its peak. It was strong enough to make ordinary angels and gods retreat in fear. Lynn had worried that he might not be able to defeat it. Even though his true body was very powerful, he was just an avatar, and borrowing power from his true body was uncertain. Unexpectedly, his true body was very generous, allowing Lynn to take off directly. However, despite the thrill of beating the Bitch Tree, there was no doubt that the more power Lynn borrowed, the closer he came to being assimilated by his true body. If he hadn't restrained himself from borrowing more power to chase down the Bitch Tree, he feared he might have died immediately after killing it, returning to his true body and ending the game. Even though Lynn restrained himself, the amount of power he borrowed this time made him suffer more than last time, which was why he fainted. The essence of fainting was a form of protection and resistance, similar to Klein's struggle against the Lordofthemysteries in his dream. Lynn was also resisting his unknown true body in his dream. Or rather, he was simply trying to maintain his independence, resisting the instinctive urge to return to his true body and become a part of it. Thankfully, this was a close call. It seems that borrowing power recklessly is dangerous, or at least I need to limit how much I borrow. Lynn continued to pat his chest, calming his pounding heart. His thoughts became more active than ever. Like last time when I fought the Dragon of Nightmares, although I felt the assimilation, it wasn't serious and I recovered quickly. But this time was much worse. I almost died. Using cheats is tempting, but the risk of getting banned is high. End of chapter. It seems like in the future, even if I need to borrow power from the original body in an emergency, it's best to limit it to sequence 0 level. Going beyond that is basically joking about my own independence. Lynn set a principle for himself in his mind. Then he remembered the bright and radiant mass he saw in his dream, like a conglomerate of light balls. His expression turned somewhat strange. Could that be my original body? In that case, am I a lonely little light ball? Is my essence also a small light ball? Don't say those balls look quite like bubbles. Bubbles, such a familiar term, feels like I've heard it somewhere. Lynn suddenly froze in place, feeling like the term, bubbles, was very familiar, but upon careful thought, he couldn't recall where he heard it. And just then, Lynn suddenly sensed something and looked towards the door. The next moment, as expected, he saw the figure of Bethel Abraham at the door, accompanied by 2 people, probably a butler and a clan member. You're finally awake. Seeing Lynn safe and sound, Bethel Abraham visibly relaxed. Then, he looked at the 2 people behind him and said, I want to talk to him alone. You 2 can step back. Yes, Lord Bethel. The butler and the clan member tactfully retreated, exchanging glances before leaving, evidently also part of the gossip circle. Witnessing this scene, Bethel Abraham thought to himself, well, it's better to straighten out the family's atmosphere afterwards. We can't let them continue messing around like this. Bethel Abraham thought with a headache, then walked into the room. As he closed the door, he looked at Lynn with a serious and solemn expression, yet his gaze remained gentle as he asked. Although you probably already know my identity, I still want to introduce myself here. Hello, I am Bethel Abraham. Thank you very much for your help this time. I don't know how to address you. Hearing Mr. Bethel's question, Lynn blinked, then had the opportunity to focus on the information of the second Smurf account he had opened. Similar to the first Smurf account, the second Smurf account was also a fallen angel, a natural mythical creature, but with a different path. Lynn's second Smurf account was a Sequence 2 Knowledge Magister through the Savon pathway, named Lynn Sotos. The reason why it turned out this way was probably because Smurf accounts were generated based on Lynn's abilities combined with random extraordinary characteristics, so the name remained the same. And the reason why the second Smurf account appeared in the starry sky was because, as a knowledge magister, the second Smurf account had always been very curious about the stars. Coupled with being a naturally born mythical creature who had been avoiding XZ since birth, there was no chance to learn much about the stars and the knowledge of the outer gods from the big shots, so naturally, it had not experienced the beating of the stars. So out of curiosity, the second Smurf account used the characteristics of an apprentice path to create corresponding magical items, and then used that magical item to leave Earth and arrive in the starry sky. And then what Lynn saw after opening his eyes. Lynn. Although he knew that the Smurf account's settings seemed to be randomly generated, the background of the second Smurf account was a bit outrageous, wasn't it? The background of the first Smurf account was somewhat understandable, relying on the deceased older brother of Little Red who died before birth, basically understandable as soul transmigration or prenatal transmigration, but the background of the second Smurf account seemed to be a bit fanciful. Could it be because the second Smurf account was forcibly generated according to my will, so its background is not as natural as the first Smurf accounts? Lynn pondered, feeling that this was very likely. Suddenly, Lynn realized something and rechecked the information of the second Smurf account. Then, as Bethel Abraham, who was waiting patiently for Lynn's answer, saw, the expression of the young man in front of him suddenly changed, and his whole demeanor became quite complicated, as if he had encountered some setback. What's wrong? What happened? Bethel Abraham's heart sank, couldn't help but ask, and in this instant, he had already imagined more than a dozen bad guesses in his mind. It's nothing. Lynn shook his head in confusion. The main reason why he was so shocked was because he found out that the period when the second Smurf account was located was during the Four Emperor War. In other words, in this period of time, Medici has already been cooked into a hot pot. Even if Lynn goes and beats Tudor, Amon, and Amon's brother, it won't change this fact. And most importantly, after another assimilation, Lynn has gained a further understanding of his ability to open Smurf accounts in different timelines. It's clear to him that he won't be able to open a third Smurf account in a short time, which is very uncomfortable. Ads by PubFuture. Sorry, Little Red, I will definitely remember to specify the exact date next time I make a wish, and I won't let such a misunderstanding happen again. May the Lord bless you, Open Sesame. Lynn clasped his hands together and chanted, his attitude so sincere that even Medici himself would subconsciously believe in it. Of course, subconscious belief is one thing, and believing this is another. Witnessing this scene, Mr. Bethel, if he wasn't very clear that the young man in front of him was so powerful, he would probably think he had brought back a lunatic. Wait, isn't being powerful and being a lunatic not contradictory? Bethel Abraham suddenly remembered his nominal superior, Blood Emperor Alistair Tudor, who could be said to be synonymous with the stronger, the crazier. Could the person in front of him be the same? Bethel Abraham was lost in thought. Cough. Just as Bethel Abraham's thoughts were gradually drifting off to a strange place, Lynn also finished his pretentious prayer. He coughed lightly, pulling back the attention of Mr. Bethel Abraham, who was obviously absent-minded not far away, and smiled, saying, "Just call me Lynn or Sotos. There's no need for any honorifics towards me. In fact, I'm just an ordinary sequence too." Mr. Bethel Abraham, who just regained his senses after hearing this. Bethel Abraham. He almost subconsciously recalled the scene where Lynn fought with Mother Tree of Desire, a battle where a mere sequence 2 would explode on the spot with just a slight impact. Even though Bethel Abraham himself could be considered the first under the gods, he could only barely protect himself in that battle, let alone participate. Seeing the young man in front of him smiling and calling himself just an ordinary sequence 2, Bethel Abraham suddenly felt that he probably couldn't understand the thinking above sequence 0. Perhaps this is the gap between him and those above sequence 0. End of this chapter. Could this be the difference between him and those above sequence 0? Bethel Abraham wasn't very sure. He suddenly thought of something and looked at Lynn with a sudden realization, saying, "If this is your will, so be it." He certainly wouldn't really think that the person before him was just an ordinary sequence 2. Perhaps the other party wasn't a complete great old one, but clearly, he also had a card up his sleeve to deal with a sequence 0 at any time. Rather than believing the other party was merely an ordinary sequence 2, Bethel Abraham preferred to think that the other party's condition wasn't very good, so he didn't want to expose his strength or identity. After all, for Bethel Abraham himself, before today, he had never heard of someone like Lynn Sotos, who was at least half an great old one. The reason for this was clearly the other party's deliberate concealment. Lynn couldn't guess what Bethel was thinking, which made him frown slightly in distress. Knowing that he couldn't explain it clearly, Lynn thought for 3 seconds and decided not to explain further. Lynn then looked at Bethel, smiling, and said, "Mr. Bethel, I wonder if I could stay at your place for a while. Also, if possible, I hope my identity can be kept secret. Additionally, if possible, could I use your channels to create a fake identity?" Having confirmed that his second Smurf account was during the Four Emperors period, Lynn decided not to go to the Solomon Empire. After all, for Lynn, the Solomon Empire now had almost no acquaintances. If Medici were still around, he wouldn't mind seeking refuge with him, but since Medici was gone, there was no need for Lynn to go to the Solomon Empire. Lynn didn't know Black Emperor Solomon, and the other bigwigs, well, he only somewhat knew Ouroboros. But Lynn was not really familiar with Ouroboros, and coupled with the presence of the true creator, which annoyed Lynn just by thinking about him, Lynn didn't think the true creator equaled to Saucereer. He didn't want to go to the Solomon Empire even more. As for the Night Emperor, that was even less worth mentioning. Compared to the Solomon Empire, given the close relationship with the six gods, Lynn didn't think that the Storm and Sun God wouldn't take action after remembering his existence. Going there would be asking for trouble. So, Lynn decided to stay in the Tudor Empire. On one hand, he had just saved Bethel's life. Given the character shown by Bethel in the original work, and what Lynn had just observed, Lynn was sure that Bethel was not an ungrateful person. With the premise of a life-saving grace, Lynn believed that Bethel wouldn't refuse to let him stay and wouldn't mind offering some help. This would solve the daily living problems. If Lynn encountered any trouble in the future, he could seek Bethel's help. On the other hand, Lynn was quite interested in meeting this era's Amon and Antigonus of the three fugitives. As for Amon's parasitism, Lynn thought, come and try parasitizing him, and see who explodes first. Without borrowing power from his true body, Lynn indeed couldn't beat Amon, but as for Amon's most disgusting parasitism ability, Lynn wasn't afraid. As for other issues, again, if worst comes to worst, he could discard this Smurf account. Also, if the situation allowed, Lynn wanted to find an opportunity to cause trouble for Blood Emperor Alistair Tudor, just to give Little Red chance to vent a little. Of course, borrowing power from his true body was out of the question. Lynn had just almost played himself to death, and he didn't plan to court death again anytime soon. The little light sphere didn't want to go home for now. Please don't call. JPG. Although this might seem a bit unfair to Little Red, I'll hit him 2 fewer times later, Lynn thought, feeling that he was indeed a good brother. Bethel Abraham naturally didn't know Lynn's series of mental activities. Hearing Lynn's words, he was slightly stunned, and almost immediately began analyzing Lynn's reasons for doing so in his mind. Is it because his condition isn't good, so he's looking for a suitable place to adjust his state? Or, is the other party specifically targeting him? Bethel Abraham pondered. He didn't think Lynn had any malice, not just because the other party had saved his life, but also because Bethel knew that if Lynn really harbored any malice, with his strength, he wouldn't be able to resist at all. Bethel inclined to believe that Lynn had some unknown purpose. After a while, he nodded slightly and looked at Lynn seriously, saying, no problem. If you're willing, you can stay as long as you want, and I won't reveal your identity to anyone else. As for a fake identity, if you're willing, you might use the identity of a member of the Abraham family for now. Thank you very much. Lynn smiled politely, then stood up, looking at Bethel and saying, would you mind showing me around? After all, it's the place where I'm going to stay for a while. I need to get familiar with it. Ads by PubFuture. Bethel Abraham was stunned for a moment. He clearly hadn't adapted to Lynn's unpredictable personality, but being inherently serious and responsible, after thinking about it, he didn't refuse this request. He nodded and said, if you're interested, of course, no problem. So, the core members of the Abraham family saw that the protagonist of their heated gossip, the boy whom the family head had brought back, was being shown around the Abraham family by the family head. This had never happened before, especially the attitude shown by the family head toward the boy, which left the core members of the Abraham family dumbfounded. Their usually serious, strict, and old-fashioned family head, who sometimes scared the younger generation just by standing there with his severe aura, was never so approachable. So, the already hot rumor became even hotter that afternoon. Fifth Epic, Lowen Kingdom, Backland, Minsk Street No. 16. After the second Smurf account finished touring the Abraham family and, having nothing else to do, hung up under the pretext of rest, Lynn switched his consciousness back to the main account, exhaled, and subconsciously thought. Speaking of which, my heroic rescue of Bethel this time, preventing him from being contaminated by the bitch tree, will it directly change history? No, in the original novel, Bethel doesn't seem to have been contaminated by the bitch tree. He seemed to have been contaminated by the mother goddess of depravity instead. So, even without me, he could escape in the original timeline. Or, did the bitch tree first discover Bethel, and then the mother goddess of depravity followed closely to contaminate him? That's also possible. When I was fighting the bitch tree, I seemed to see an outer god close by, like the mother goddess of depravity, running away. Lynn stroked his chin, feeling that he could explore this aspect. If his actions this time really changed Bethel's fate, the Abraham family's current situation would certainly change greatly, no longer being in that nearly extinct, miserable state. Of course, it was also possible that although he changed history, Bethel would still be contaminated in the later cosmic journey. Or, as he once guessed, Bethel's fate, altered by him, wouldn't directly change the original history but would immediately alter the current situation. Lynn thought this was an excellent research material. And to figure this out, The most direct and simple method was to see if Furs was still troubled by the full moon ravings. End of the chapter. Ads by PubFuture. Although today is the full moon, it's still daytime, so there's no rush. I can give Klein a surprise first. Lynn stretched, stood up, and walked to the window. He glanced at 15 Minsk Street across the street to confirm that Klein hadn't left. Taking a deep breath, Lynn began preparing for the upcoming script. The script he referred to was naturally about an angelic fellow informing Lynn Sotos about the whereabouts of the Sephiroth, and using an irresistible condition to make Lynn Sotos pray to the fool. Lynn couldn't be sure Klein would follow the script and join the Tarot Club, and he didn't plan to force it with 008. Even if this script didn't work, Lynn had scripts 2, 3, and 4 lined up. He wasn't worried at all. So, while Klein, who was at home with no commissions, sipping coffee and reading the newspaper, watched Lynn Sotos happily leave the house in his indescribable disguise as if he had received a commission, a few hours later, he saw a despondent Lynn Sotos appear on Minsk Street. Or rather, he looked more like someone who had faced a significant choice and was on the brink of financial ruin. What's going on? Klein frowned slightly. He watched Lynn through the window, hesitating whether to go out and ask, when Lynn seemed to sense his gaze and looked up at him. Klein hesitated for a second, stood up, and waved at Lynn. A dozen seconds later, the familiar guest was once again in the living room of 15 Minsk Street. Lynn, what's wrong? Are you in some sort of trouble? Klein poured a cup of coffee for Lynn, as was his habit, and asked with concern. Whether for personal or professional reasons, Klein couldn't ignore Lynn's abnormality. I'm not sure if I should say. Lynn took the coffee, took a sip, and looked both hesitant and conflicted, wanting to confide but feeling it might not be appropriate. In acting, Lynn really had a firm grasp. Klein naturally saw through Lynn's deliberate hesitation. He thought for a moment, sipped his coffee, and said, if you're in trouble, why not talk to me? You know my capabilities. Even if you've offended someone as significant as the Intis ambassador again, I can still take on your commission. His tone was calm and gentle, yet the content was reassuring. It's not that. Lynn shook his head, looking at Klein. After a few seconds of hesitation, he sighed and said, do you remember the fool that Miss Audience's companion mentioned to us last time? What's this about the fool? Klein was momentarily stunned but maintained a composed expression. He looked at Lynn with a hint of confusion and said, what? Have you discovered something about the fool, or encountered something related to the fool? His expression was natural, as if he really didn't know anything about the fool, much less having any connection with the fool. In terms of acting, the transmigrators were all naturally proficient, except for a certain emperor. Perhaps this was why all his fellow countrymen had thrived, except for a certain emperor who was forced to be in a state of neither life nor death, waiting for Klein's rescue. Lynn's gaze wavered, his lips moving but unable to speak a word for a while. Fortunately, Klein had enough patience. He didn't rush Lynn, sipping his coffee slowly and waiting quietly. The living room became silent. After a full half-minute, Klein saw that Lynn seemed to have finally made up his mind, but his first sentence almost made Klein choke. I have a friend, a very close friend. Klein. Ads by PubFuture. Are you talking about yourself? Klein was genuinely amused. He hadn't expected Lynn to use the classic, I have a friend, line. Considering Lynn's usual personality, it suddenly seemed very fitting. Although Lynn was cautious about some things, in many matters, it was hard to tell if he was being deliberately careless or genuinely so. Well, what about your friend? Despite his internal jokes, Klein naturally didn't expose Lynn and followed up with the question. My friend, for some special reasons, might have to pray to the fool. Lynn said, and then he heard coughing. It turned out that Klein, who was sipping coffee, finally choked. Cough. Klein coughed twice, not even bothering to wipe the coffee he had accidentally spilled. He looked at Lynn and confirmed, you want to pray to the fool? Are you kidding me? Klein didn't worry that his reaction would raise suspicions. After all, anyone with basic knowledge of the Beyonder world would react this way to Lynn's words. It's not me, it's my friend. Lynn retorted without changing his expression. All right, it's not you, it's your friend. Klein didn't dwell on this point. He looked at Lynn with puzzlement and surprise, asking, "But why would your friend suddenly want to pray to the fool? Doesn't he know how dangerous it is? The fool could be an unknown hidden existence, possibly even an evil god." When it came to self-deprecation, Klein didn't hesitate when necessary. He knows it's dangerous. In fact, he knows very well that after praying, he might end up like Miss Audience's friend, falling into the abyss with no chance of rescue. Lynn put down his coffee, his eyes drifting as if lost in memories, his voice growing softer. "Then why are you still praying to the fool?" Klein asked again. He didn't need any intuitive sense to guess that this likely had something to do with his angelic fellow countrymen. Not me, because someone offered my friend an irresistible condition." Lynn seemed to wake from his memories. He drank his coffee again, as if convincing himself, "Some things are more important than my own life." Klein was momentarily speechless. He didn't know what conditions were offered to Lynn or what situation could drive Lynn to risk his life despite knowing the dangers. Klein could tell that Lynn had already made up his mind. He might be somewhat hesitant, but he mainly wanted to confide in someone, not really seeking advice. End of chapter.